so lovely to be here tonight. What a beautiful life. Give yourself some round of applause. You're so lovely.
First off, I hope everyone had a wonderful Juneteenth. And in the spirit of Juneteenth, you may have seen a testimony from Ta-Nehisi Coates where he advocated on behalf of reparations, which is, of course, a very, I would say, controversial subject. Unnecessarily so, but a controversial subject to this day. And I really recommend that if you haven't seen it already, you watch and read the testimony that Ta-Nehisi Coates gave, as well as his article on the case for reparations, because it's brilliantly researched and wonderfully stated. It's a must read for, I believe, everyone. Anyone that's serious about justice and equality, they should read that. It's not just relegated to black people should know this. Everyone should read this because you need to understand the history behind it. But with that being the case, every time the issue of reparations comes up, certain people dismiss it outright. It's not only being something that's unnecessary, but something without precedent, that it represents some kind of departure from the norm. And the crazy thing is, that could not be any further from the truth. So I wanted to just tell you a quick story about a law that many people don't know about. We all know that the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect in 1863. It didn't, of course, reach everyone until 1865. That's how we have Juneteenth, when the last enslaved people were informed of it. And, of course, slavery was outlawed by the Constitution when the 13th Amendment was ratified in December of 1865. But what you might not have heard of is an act also signed by Abraham Lincoln called the District of Columbia Emancipation Act. This act was an attempt to make slave owners whole for the loss of their property. So what it offered to do was to pay $300 for every slave that a slave owner emancipated. So yes, you heard that correctly. The slave owners were paid to release the people who they held in bondage, the people that they whipped, the people who they exploited, the people who they deprived of education. They received nothing when they were emancipated, but the slave owner received $300. And the biggest payoff from this act was $18,000. And just to give you a little perspective, $18,000 in 1862, for example, that's the equivalent of $450,000 right now. So again, I remind you, someone who had held another person in bondage, a person who had no skills other than the skills that they had to enrich the person who enslaved them. They were illiterate, they had not amassed property, they received nothing, but the person who held them received almost $500,000 in modern day money for doing that. That's the reparations that have already been paid by our government, but not to the people who deserve them. There were also other places where if you released your slaves, but then you rehired them as labor, as free labor, you were eligible for subsidies from the government. So yet again, the slave owners were given reparations for the loss of their property. So there's a lot of precedent for people receiving reparations regarding slavery, just not the enslaved people. And as we sit here the day after Juneteenth and we continue to celebrate all of the many strides that all the great people who came before us made, and we keep pressing forward, anytime the subject of reparations comes up and someone gives you the impression that it's unprecedented, that it doesn't make sense, that it's not feasible, that it's not tenable, remind them of the District of Columbia Emancipation Act and all the many ways in which our government compensated slave owners, but never the slave. We can't undo the past, but it's all of our duty to continue moving forward by correcting the sins of the past. And part of that is making the people whole who are responsible for the wealth of this country that we all live in. So yes, we should receive reparations, and I hope everyone had a wonderful Juneteenth. So